In talking about Afghanistan, it's probably best to begin by taking a look at a world map. Back before there were sea routes, everyone coming from Europe passed through Afghanistan to reach China or India. There was no way to get to the east without going through Afghanistan. This is Balkh, in the heart of ancient Bactria, where Alexander the Great spent some years. There are camels here now, and it is likely that camels first opened this road in ancient times. Traces of various races of people were thought to be buried in these ruins, but none have been found despite repeated excavation. It is a source of some mystery. This is the Silk Road in Jalalabad, in the eastern part of the country. This road led to India through what is Pakistan today. Moving in the other direction, Buddhism and Eastern culture passed along this road from India and Pakistan. These are the ruins of the famous city of Hadda. These ruins were first excavated in the 1920s. A great number of ancient Buddhist sculptures have been uncovered here. Particularly striking was this sculpture depicting Hercules serving the Buddha. This famous work, seen here in a photograph, vividly captured the interchange between Eastern and Western cultures. The whereabouts of this sculpture are not known. These ruins are very close to bases in Pakistan that guerrillas used as staging grounds for attacks, so they often became a battleground and were sometimes under guerrilla control. There were still mines in place, so we could not easily approach the ruins. This footage is from 1988, and today very little of these rough stone ruins remain. It is very unfortunate. Beginning in the early 20th century, artifacts that were unearthed in various parts of Afghanistan began to be gathered in Kabul. The royal family, recognizing the value of these relics, established a museum to house them. This is the Kabul National Museum prior to its destruction. This is the devastated Kabul National Museum, photographed in 2002 by a woman named Izuka Junko. We had long been concerned about the fate of the museum, until one day, more than 5 years after we filmed there, this photograph appeared in the Yomiuri Shimbun. The distraught man pictured here was the vice director of the museum, Najibullah Popal, who had given us invaluable assistance during our filming. We continued to see reports of the destruction of the museum. We began to understand that the vestiges of what we had seen were fast disappearing. The museum had remained undamaged, at least until the Soviet withdrawal in February 1989. The decade-long civil war that followed brought the museum to its current state. The same newspaper reported that Gandharan Buddhas stolen from the museum fetched a high price, in some cases more than $100,000, on the black market. These statues found their way to Japan and to Europe. Efforts were made to evacuate the treasures for safekeeping, but they weren't enough. After the Taliban seized power, they announced they would destroy the great Buddhas of Bamiyan in accord with their prohibition of idolatry. Many of the leaders of Islam opposed these measures, but they were unable to prevent them. They say this destruction was carried out by young people who had no understanding of Afghanistan's history. The great Buddhas of Bamiyan, an extraordinary world heritage, were destroyed. There is no way the damage can be undone. These ruins were filled with stone buildings and caves, and thus were used to build military strongholds. In 2002, the Afghan Ministry of Culture and Information announced that 70% of the items housed in the Kabul Museum had been destroyed. Because of these developments, we decided to take a look back at the Kabul Museum we had filmed years before. This is a record of the Kabul Museum in 1988. The footage has never been released before. This is the exterior of the museum as it appeared at the time. It was located in a very quiet corner of the city. We were told that the museum held over 15,000 items, but that less than 10% were on display. 9 out of 10 items housed in the museum were unearthed in Afghanistan. It is said that the study of history here began with the interpretation of these excavated antiquities. History texts then in use in Afghan schools only went as far back as the birth of Muhammad in the 6th century, so for many, seeing these relics was an introduction to a more ancient history. This bust of Amintas is the largest silver coin in the world. The image is quite realistic and human. It is from the 2nd century BC. Given the existence of coins like these, it had long been speculated that there was an ancient country called Greco-Bactria, but the actual location of the country remained a mystery. Then, as study of the 2,000-year-old society known only through its coins progressed, ruins were discovered in a place called Ai-Khanom. These are the ruins of Ai-Khanom, near the border with the former Soviet Union. This site was discovered only in the mid-1960s, which is not very long ago. There was an amphitheater, the symbol of Greek architecture, large enough to hold 6,000 people, as well as a gymnasium and other buildings. This room, the Ai-Khanom room, is one of the most famous in the Kabul Museum. At its center is a statue of Hermes. This statue is of a priest or king, modeled after Hermes. It is a sculpture that evokes the spirit of ancient Greece with its dignified philosophical expression. These relics are said to have come from the Mediterranean region during the era of Alexander the Great. This is a statue of Hercules. It is a very youthful, realistic Hercules that brings to mind Alexander the Great himself. This is described as a procession of the goddess Cybele. In the chariot pulled by a lion, Cybele is depicted along with Nike, the goddess of victory. The sun god is also shown. At his side are the moon and the stars. This image was apparently mass-produced. Its mold survives. This is a commemorative plaque with the image of Poseidon, the god of the sea. This image depicts an eagle carrying away Ganymede, said to have been an extremely handsome youth captured by the gods. This was an extraordinary, beautiful sculpture of a hand, one that we would be hard-pressed to match even in the modern era. There were a large number of sculptures from the Greco-Bactrian era. The world of ancient Greece unfolded in these many images. Very few of these items were made by Afghanis. Among the relics was the left foot of Zeus, the king of the Greek gods. The image of a king of the nomadic Kushan people. The Kushan valued Buddhism highly, and it is during the Kushan period that Afghan and Gandharan Buddhist art originated. The patterns on this image provide a sense of the designs favored by the indigenous people during the Kushan period. This is an image of a man from that period, probably just an ordinary man. His facial expression gives a good sense of the people of that time. This room contains relics from Begram, the Kushan summer capital. Well-preserved art objects were discovered in the rooms of a fortress from this city. These images of Yakshini are distinctively Indian, but it is said that no such images survive in India itself. They have only been found here. Their presence in Begram is evidence of exchanges between Afghanistan and Indian territory, controlled by the Kushan kings of this period. This piece depicts well the manners of the time. Women of the nobility are putting on makeup. One holds a mirror in her hands. Their voluptuous figures are liberally depicted. This image indicates the strength of Indian influence on Afghanistan during this period. There was an exhibit of Mediterranean glassware from the Greco-Roman period. The objects depict well-loved creatures from the sea, including sturgeon and dolphins. This is a glass cup with 4 youths making garlands. A young woman weaves flowers into garlands, while young men bring the blossoms. The fluid brush strokes and exquisite sense of color make this an exceptional piece. No comparable works have survived in the Aegean region. This is a unique and precious object. This is also a Greco-Roman goblet. The painting depicts scenes of fish and hunting. This is a hunter. This elaborate glassware depicting the lighthouse called Pharos is also from Alexandria. Greek gods and a variety of boats from the Hellenistic period are depicted. Glasscraft techniques like this were only practiced in Egypt during this time. This bronze is a syncretic fusion of 2 gods, Serapis and Hercules. It is thought to have been created in an effort to promote harmony between the Greeks and the Egyptians of the time. A phial. This glassware was made by fusing various colors of glass powder, a distinctively Egyptian work of art. This is a vase in the shape of a bird with a human head. This was probably produced in Egypt, but the typically Indian-style motif is distinctive. This is a room of Buddhist sculptures of the Kapisi school, a distinctively Afghan style, which were created during the Kushan period around the same time that Gandharan art flourished. The images of Buddha from this period have flames coming from their shoulders, a characteristic of the Kapisi school. It is said to reflect Zoroastrian fire worship, which has assumed the shape of the Buddha. This is a carving of the famous Dipankara Jataka. This depicts the legend in which a prophet named Dipankara came to see Sakyamuni and told him that without fail he would become the Buddha. Here we see Sakyamuni throwing down his hair for Dipankara to walk across. These Kapisi school works are quite formal, and the lines cannot be called graceful. The figures are rigid. This depicts three brothers serving the Buddha and the nobility making offerings to the Buddha. These people are in formal Kushan dress. Their clothing covers their shoulders. They are thought to have made an offering in support of the Buddha. Numerous disciples are depicted here, and their faces are clearly Kushan and not European. The work is invaluable for the way it depicts the people and clothing of the time. This is a standing Buddha excavated at a site called Jabul Saraj. The rendering of his clothing is quite realistic. This is a seated bodhisattva, excavated at a Kushan Salang period Buddhist temple called Marajan Tepe, east of Kabul. Finely rendered, reflecting the influence of Gandharan art, it expresses a deep reverence toward Buddhism. We've been looking at Buddhist images from the Shotorak site. Images like these were first produced during the Kushan dynasty, some 500 years after the death of Buddha, in Gandhara, Afghanistan, and in the Indian city of Mathura. Prior to that period, the Buddha was represented by images of lotus blossoms or by the sole of a foot to indicate his footsteps. But the Buddhist images of this era, influenced by Greco-Roman sculpture, were produced with the Buddha assuming a human form. The Buddhist images from this era are characterized by deep, well-defined carving and facial expressions that reflect inner belief. This is a silver coin with the bust of Shapur II. The depiction of fire worship reflects the fact that Zoroastrian beliefs persisted during this period. Along with the great Buddhas of Bamiyan, the best-known aspect of Afghan antiquity is Gandharan art, exhibited here. Viewed simply as sculpture, the Buddhist images shown here are quite exceptional. Many Afghanis, even if they didn't have much understanding of their own country's history, were drawn to visit this room of the museum. This is a famous seated Buddha. It was made from stucco. Stucco is not stone, but rather a plaster made from a mixture of powdered limestone and sand. It is used in a technique that is quite similar to modern plaster cast sculpture. This is also stucco. The use of plaster allows great freedom of expression. There was a wide variety of Buddhist images here. A French survey team was reportedly deeply impressed with the extent to which the European mode had permeated this work. This is the head of a Buddha. This figure one might easily call a Greek sculpture, though it was produced in Afghanistan. This is a head of a Buddha that is widely known for its beauty. The elegance and delicacy of this sculpture is characteristic of Hada. This is said to be a statue of Atlas, the god who holds up the heavens. In addition to sculptures of the gods, many of the sculptures depicted ordinary people with deep religious faith. These seem to me images of young men, which one could easily imagine being produced today. This is a collection of demons. This kind of bold deformation is possible because they were made with the clay-like stucco. This is an image of the female god Devata holding up the three treasures representing the Buddha, the law, and the order. This female figure seems to clearly reflect a European aesthetic sensibility. This female figure has no connection to Buddhism, but it seems to me to be a very beautiful depiction of the female ideal. There is still color on her lips, and she has an extraordinarily beautiful expression. Afghanistan's history is embedded in these objects, but not all of them had yet been studied and exhibited. According to the museum vice director Najibullah Popal, only 1,500 of the total number of objects were on exhibit. Many of the objects that awaited research were kept in this room of the museum. All of these objects were unearthed at Hada. Research into Afghan art only began in earnest in the mid-20th century. More time was needed before its history could be understood. This is a room of wall paintings from the vicinity of the great Buddhas of Bamiyan. Among these, the painting of a seated Buddha is especially noted for its vivid colors. It is considered the wellspring for Buddhist wall paintings throughout the world. This is the Fundukistan exhibit room. These works from the 7th and 8th centuries represent the last period of Buddhist art. This seated Buddha was made from clay. This made it possible to produce finely rendered expression. The statue was then painted. This is a very arresting figure, which seems alive to its fingertips and whose eyes stare right out at the visitor. Its elegance and refinement and its mystery epitomize the ancient art of Afghanistan. This sculpture, engulfed in flames, is called the Death of Jyotiska's Mother. It is based on a legend in which the Buddha pulled a fetus from the burning body of its mother. This bodhisattva appears in many art books as a leading example of Afghani art. It has absorbed both the influence of Iran and India, reflected in its adornment and expression. Its white color and lack of shading is thought to evoke the influence of the Sasanian Empire in Persia. The many works of art that were not yet on display at the museum were kept in storage under strict security. There were many archaeological finds here that were yet to be classified. It was said that considerable time would be needed to put these items in order. In these rooms, the Nuristan woodcraft art was particularly striking. Nuristan was a remote region of Afghanistan where it was thought that Greeks lived, and the region was heavily forested. These were distinctive sculptures of a style not seen elsewhere. This is a large marble pot displayed at the entrance to the museum. It was thought to date back to the Buddhist era, but to have been reworked later with Arabic lettering. With this basin, our filming at the Kabul Museum came to a close. Beginning over 1,000 years ago, Islam erected beautiful mosques throughout Afghanistan. I had the sense that all of Islamic art was concentrated into these buildings. Today, too, with some 98% of the country Muslim, it is at these mosques that people gather for prayer. The human figure does not appear in this Islamic art. Instead, the mosques are decorated with distinctive ornamentation made with flowers and grasses and beautifully rendered Arabic lettering. Meanwhile, Buddhist and Greco-Roman art were considered the art of infidels and were kept at a great distance. Mazar-i-Sharif is a city in the ancient Bactria where Alexander the Great spent 2 years. There are both Sunni and Shiite Muslims here, but the Blue Mosque is considered holy to the Shiites. It is likely that this mosque has survived the wars unscathed. The more than 1,000-year history of Islamic art is condensed here in this mosque. It is said that non-Muslims were especially unwelcome at this mosque, which was once surrounded by iron railings, and non-Muslims were refused entry. That Islamic art took the form of mosque architecture meant that it was very close to people's lives. It is a testament to the intensity of religious faith over the centuries. The words written here in the mosaic walls represent an aesthetic whole that has been a continuous presence in Afghan life. For the most part, this world has escaped the flames of war. It can be said that all art is created in the spiritual context of its era. We were able to see much of the art that is the legacy of the prayers and the sense of beauty of people of many religions throughout the thousands of years of Afghanistan's history. These things will undoubtedly be the pride of Afghanis in the future. Recently, the discovery of new ruins and the re-excavation of existing ruins have repeatedly been in the news. According to the Afghan government, only 200 archaeological sites are registered, but over 4,000 exist. There is still much to be learned. Preparations are underway in Japan to return 20 relics from the Kabul Museum that made their way to Japan. I sincerely hope that all of these treasures are returned to Afghanistan, where they belong and from where they can issue their appeal to the peoples of the world.